we will start Euripides' Iphigenia among the Taurians. How does he translate it? Any of you notice? Oh, good, he does it right. So almost everybody translates it Iphigenia in Taurus. Goethe writes a play called Iphigenia in Taurus, translated out of the German. And what's interesting about that is that they all assume that there's a city, a place, named Taurus. But in fact, the title, Aeschylus's title, says Iphigenia among the Taurians, and so you're left to wonder what the status is of the place where Iphigenia is. And that turns out to be very important for the play as a whole. So you should read, as usual, the whole thing, so you have a sense of what happens in the whole. And I think we'll get through less than 100 lines the first day. We'll spend 4 days on this play and then 2 days on, what's the other one? Somebody tell me. The Hippolytus, and then we're done. We're that close to the end. But today we finished the Bacchae. So the Bacchae is a play about the status of Greek as opposed to barbarian religion. This in turn has something to do with the fact that Dionysus has a double plan when he comes back to Thebes. On the one hand, he wants to make Pentheus recognize him as the son of Semele. On the other hand, he wants to introduce the rites and practices of his cult, which he has introduced already in Asia. Now, the first of these, the parts of this plan, requires that he be recognized. In order to make Pentheus acknowledge him as the son of Semele, he has to be recognized as who he is. The second part of the plan requires that he remain disguised, hidden. So you could say the first part of the plan requires that he be Dionysus. The second part of the plan requires that he be a priest of Dionysus. Now, his plan seems to be to find a way to do both of these things at the same time. And if he succeeds, he will be, in this way, superior to his father Zeus, on the one hand, because he will actually show himself to human beings, and on the other hand, he'll vindicate the desire of his mother, Semele, to see his father face to face. So the play is in a way about the mother's claim to have direct contact with the divine. Now, at the same time, the play has to do with the very strange ways in which Dionysus appears, in which he shows himself. Think last time at line 16 following, when we discovered that in the description of what was going on when he was first tied up by Pentheus, and then the events subsequent to that, we noticed that there were at least 4 of him, 4 versions of Dionysus. And think also about Tiresias's claim. We didn't go into it in detail, but we're told, see if I've got the line number. We're told that there are 4 ways in which, no, I'm sorry, that's not what I want. Let's try, here we are. We're at line, top of the page, it says 274 to 316. And I mentioned this to you last time, that we are given the claim in the middle that when Zeus snatched him from the thunderbolt's flame, let's go back. You sneer at the story that he was stitched inside the thigh, Homeros, of Meros, actually, the thigh of Zeus. I will teach you the true interpretation of that. When Zeus snatched him from the thunderbolt's flame and brought the infant god to Olympus, Hera wanted to cast him out of heaven. But Zeus contrived a counter device as a god might. He broke off a portion, a piece, Meros. It differs only short e rather than long e. A portion of the earth, enveloping sky, and gave jealous Hera not an incorporate, he's trying to do the pun, but you really can't, gave Hera a hostage, a Homeros, whoops, gave Hera a hostage of the earth, a hostage of Dionysus. But in time, the word got changed and said the child had been incorporated, had been made a part of Zeus. So they made up the story that he had been snatched, he had been stitched inside Homeros of Zeus. Now, what's interesting is this. If we're paying attention, we notice that there's something else going on here. Homeros is the name Homer. So there's some connection between the birth of Dionysus and poetry. You could say, without stretching too much, that Dionysus is saved from destruction by Homer. So this is connected to Dionysus as the patron god of tragedy. Roughly, very roughly, then, it seems that there's some connection between Dionysus as the god of tragedy and Dionysus's plan to show himself while at the same time concealing himself. We're going to come back to that again and again. In a way, I think it's what the whole play is about. So today, I want to look at three things. We need to look at what this new religion that Dionysus is introducing into Greece from Asia involves, what's special about it. We need to look at Pentheus' conversion and see what it means and how it is affected. And finally, we need to turn to the end of the play and ask some questions about it and about its relation to the beginning of the play, because it ends rather, from our point of view, from the point of view of the plot, rather strangely. We haven't heard a lot about Cadmus and Harmonia, and then, in a way, what Dionysus does is turn them into snakes and exile them and tell a story about how they're going to come back at the head of an Asian army. So we don't quite understand what that means. Okay, so what exactly does it mean to worship Dionysus? Now, the first account of the attributes of Dionysus is from Tiresias at line 266 following, and we get this. Give a wise man a good theme to talk on, and it's easy enough to speak well. Your tongue indeed runs smoothly as if you had wit, but there's no wit in what you say. The man whose strength is his impudence, whose ability is all in his tongue, makes a bad citizen, and a stupid one. This new divinity, whom you ridicule, words cannot describe how great will be his power throughout Hellas. Mankind, young man, has two first things. Goddess Demeter, the earth, that is, call her whichever name you will, who sustains men with solid food, and this son of Semele, who came later and matched her gift. He invented the liquid draught of the grape and introduced it to mortals. When they get their fill of the flowing grape, it stops their pain. It gives them sleep and forgetfulness of daily sorrows. There is no other medicine for trouble. The libations we pour are the God himself, making our peace with the gods so that through him mankind may obtain good things. Now it goes on at some length. We'll go through the list. There are actually 7 attributes. The first is wine. It stops pain, gives sleep, gives forgetfulness of the bad things of the day. There's no other drug for toils like it. And therefore we use this wine, that is, this God, having been born, is poured in offering to the gods so that on account of him, human beings have good things. So we're told, in effect, that Dionysus is responsible for the link between gods and human beings, and he's responsible for it insofar as he allows human beings to lose sight of their immediate pains, of their immediate troubles. So that's the first attribute. The second is the story about how the myth came to be of Dionysus as having been sewn away in Zeus's knee, the one we just went through in terms of the punning. This story about Dionysus is apparently due to the inability in human beings to hear the difference between homeros, with the accent on the final syllable, and homeros, so thigh on the one hand and hostage on the other hand. So you could say the story originates because of our inability to see that one sound can yield 2 meanings. The story originates because of our inability to see double. Dionysus, therefore, we're looking at trying to understand what his traits are. Dionysus seems to have something to do with seeing double. So if you jump ahead to line 918 following, we cited this, I think, last time, bottom of the page. I seem to see 2 suns and a double Thebes, 2 7-gated cities, and a bull is leading me on. You seem to be a bull with horns growing out of your head. Were you ever an animal? Certainly you have the look of a bull. So the first thing is wine. The second thing is, interestingly enough, something that sometimes is a result of drinking wine, double vision. Third thing, Dionysus is a seer, a mantis. He is a prophetic God, your translation says. He possesses human beings and makes them able to see the future. Fourth thing, we're told he's responsible for panic. Cross out the parenthetical remark. This is also a sort of madness sent by Dionysus and his follower Pan. That's not in the original. That's your translator trying to make sense, although obviously the etymology of panic is connected to the god Pan. So Dionysus is responsible for another kind of madness, for panic, understood as a groundless fear that ends up being the cause of the very result it's fear of. So you become afraid without reason, and the consequence is that you behave in such a way as though the thing that your panic makes you afraid of is really present. So you could put it in this way: Dionysus is responsible for an illusion that's so powerful that it guarantees that it will become the reality of which it's the illusion. Then we're told, a time will come when you will see him even on Delphi's rock. On Delphi's rock seems to suggest that the fifth trait of Dionysus is that he is eventually going to be the power among the gods. Sixth, not even Dionysus can compel women to be chaste. He's not, as he's sometimes thought to be, the cause of sexual license. He doesn't prevent it, but he only allows what's already there to emerge in human beings. And finally, we're told, you take pleasure when a multitude stands at your gates, and so on. He, like Pentheus, delights in honor. So what have we got? Dionysus is a god of illusion, although Tiresias in his account doesn't make this connection. This illusion is at once a powerful cure for human beings. For example, wine. It allays our fears and our pains, and at the same time, a great danger for human beings. It leads to panic. It is the principal connection, the principle of the connection between gods and human beings, and it's linked to poetry in this way. And finally, Dionysus is in some way, just like all the other gods, he wants to be honored. Okay, what else do we know about him? Look once again at line 679 following, and we get this. This is the herdsman. Our herds of pasturing kine had just begun to ascend the steep to the ridge. At the hour when the sun shoots forth his rays to warm the earth, I saw 3 bands of women dancers. Atanawe was the leader of the first chorus, your mother Agave of the second, and Ino of the third. They all lay in the sleep of exhaustion, and so on. So his followers divide into 3 choruses, each chorus led by one of the 3 remaining sisters. What happens after that is that there is a collapsing of the distinction between among the various kinds of animals. So human mothers are seen to nurse various animals. Then, after that, we're told the earth itself generates milk and other nourishment. So first you get a collapse of the kinds of animals, then you get a collapsing of the distinction between rock, Petra, and earth, Ge, and Chthona, and animals. So first, no distinction among the animals. Second, no distinction among the physical beings. And finally, the whole account culminates in this rather miraculous story about the dancing mountain. So you could say that according to this account, everything becomes one. Everything becomes the same and alive. Now, once they become, we're told at 850, once they become Dionysus, the task is now yours. You are not far off. Let us punish this man. First, drive him from his wits. Once his followers become out of their wits, they rend heifers into pieces and eat them raw. They pillage homes. So it looks as though we're getting something like this, which is just an echoing of something we'd already seen in Tiresias' initial description of Dionysus. This oneness with nature that Dionysus stands for really has two sides to it. On the one hand, you could say the peaceable kingdom, where everything reduces to everything else and everything is one with everything else. On the other hand, the inability to distinguish the human leads to a kind of brutality. Now, finally, the worship of Dionysus is primarily the preserve of women, although we are told, I don't have a line number, but let me see. Yeah, it's line number 358 to 414. We're told, middle of the page, you need a translation change. Or on the earth, the wine bowl cast the mantle of sleep around the ivy-wreathed festivities of men, male men. So it's odd that seems to be the only exception to the general sense that it's primarily women who are the followers of Dionysus. So it looks as though introducing Dionysus to Thebes would involve replacing the most famous thing about Thebes, the autochthony myth, with the myth of the earthborn rulers. Pentheus is called that at 995. It would mean replacing that so women are somehow bypassed in the autochthony myth because Cadmus is the father and the mother is the earth. So there aren't any real mothers. Here, women are once again identified with the natural over and against Pentheus, who stands for what? It's interesting, if you look at line 945 to 48, you get this. That's not what I want. Pentheus. Take me through the middle of Thebes. I am the only man of them that would make this venture. Stranger, you are the only one that troubles about your city, the only one. Therefore, trials await you, fitting trials. So Pentheus stands for the city. Now, some problems with this view. All the worshippers of Dionysus we actually see, as opposed to those of whom we hear reports, are Asian women from the chorus. They never do anything that looks like any of what is being described. Look, for example, at line 370 following. In the first stasimon, we get this. Holiness, holiness, Queen of heaven, as you turn your golden wings earthward, do you not hear these words of Pentheus? Do you hear this unholy defiance of Bromius, Semele's son, the god of lovely garlands and good cheer, the prince of the blessed ones? This is his realm, revelry and dancing, flute playing and laughter, and the banishing of care, whether the presence of the grape brightens the banquets of the gods, or the earth of the wine bowl casts the mantle of sleep around the ivy-wreathed festivities of men. Of unbridled lips and lawless folly, the only end is disaster, but the quiet life of wisdom abides unshaken and sustains the home. For though they dwell remote in the sky, the sons of heaven regard the affairs of men. Knowledge is not wisdom. Thoughts too long make life short. If man in his brief moment goes after things too great for him, he may lose the joys within his reach. To my mind, that is the way of madness and perversity. They sound pretty common, ordinary. Put this together with the constant references to what they do as lawful. A little further on, the chorus say, let justice advance in plain sight, advance sword in hand, to strike through the throat, to slaughter the godless, the lawless, the unjust man, the earth-born son of Achaean. So they're relatively tame. And that makes it look as though Dionysus is just an ordinary god. Well, what then about his new converts? They seem to be a little crazier than that. The sisters of Semele and the rest of the women in Thebes. What's absolutely crucial in trying to understand the play is to remember that this is explicitly, according to Dionysus, a punishment. Their behavior is a punishment. These women did not acknowledge that Semele had slept with Zeus, and they're being punished with madness. That on as early as line 32. So what's happening in the mountains isn't the goal. It's a punishment designed to get at Thebes, which means ultimately the men of Thebes. So let's then look at what happens when Pentheus converts. His first response to the rampage of the Theban women is what? He says, line 78 following, send in the heavy armed soldiers. So the first response is to try to settle it by force. Then Dionysus convinces him not to do that. But why is that important? Wouldn't the miracle of the defeat of the heavy armed soldiers be all the greater than the miracles that have already happened? So you could say Dionysus's plan seems to imply either Pentheus armed is in fact protection against conversion, or Dionysus recognizes that no matter how great the miracle, Pentheus is never going to be impressed by anything that he does. The question is whether these two possibilities aren't really the same. So Pentheus's armor, on the one hand, he's presented to us as the only active male citizen of Thebes. Dionysus has said that he's the only one who cares about the polis. Pentheus is, in a way, the representative of the city. His armor is, in turn, almost a magical charm against enchantment. So when he first gets frustrated with Dionysus's claims that his armed men will be defeated, the first thing he does, line 787 following, is call for his armor. So Pentheus's view of what's appropriate, of what's noble, conventionally appears to protect him from Dionysus's power. Okay, then what happens? Why doesn't that protect him from Dionysus's power? What is the beginning of his undoing? What's the beginning of his disarming? Look at line 810 following. We get this. We read this last time. Ah, would you like to see them in their gatherings upon the mountain? Very much. Aye, and pay unaccounted gold for the pleasure. Why have you fallen into a great eros? Though it would pain me to see them drunk with wine, yet it would please you to see what is a pain to you. Be sure I would if I could sit quietly under the firs. Okay, so on the one hand, this really does point to a kind of prurience on Pentheus's part. He is officially, Euripides isn't the first one to do this. Shakespeare does it really wonderfully in Measure for Measure. You know that play? It's a great play, where Angelo takes over from the Duke. The Duke decides he's going to cut out because Vienna has become entirely too sexually active, and he doesn't want to be the one to discipline them. So he puts his first lieutenant Angelo in charge, and he knows what Angelo will do. Angelo will crack down on them, and then the Duke can come back and get the benefits of that. People won't hate him. They'll hate Angelo. So that's his master plan. And the thing about Angelo is that he has this incredible prissiness about him on the one hand, and on the other hand, this underlying prurience. So what Shakespeare points to is the way in which those two things go together. Nietzsche saw that too, and thus spoke Zarathustra, when he made the remark that the thing that sexual license and chastity have in common is that they're present in people who think entirely too much about sex. You're preoccupied with sex if you want it all the time, and you're preoccupied with sex if you want to repress it all the time. So Euripides has done something very similar here. Pentheus is protected from the craziness of Dionysus, from the madness, from the loss of self, by his armor. What's his armor? His armor is, in a way, the conventional virtues that he stands for. He stands for political life. He's invulnerable to these natural urges because of the power of morality in him, you could say, of conventional morality. So what is Dionysus to do? He could he could send out his troops. I mean, he could let Pentheus send out his troops, and then they could be defeated by a bunch of women, and they'd be disgraced. But Pentheus is in a way utterly immune to any contrary evidence. Nothing is going to convince him. So what does Dionysus do? It looks as though Dionysus appeals to something in him that seduces him. So that's where we are. That's where we are at the moment. You could say Dionysus appeals to a natural element in all of us that no amount of civilizing can utterly drive out. But you could also say that there's a strong suggestion that he would take pleasure in quietly contemplating their future punishment. So he seems to have complete confidence that this desire to punish is somehow a function of his political position, this is Pentheus, and not linked with a natural desire. So Pentheus doesn't realize that the city, the polis, civilization itself is in some way, it's impossible for it to be completely apart from nature. It has to be an outgrowth of some natural drive. And this seems to be the wedge that Dionysus needs. So Pentheus has a view of what's noble. It requires of him that he go openly, not secretly. He's not ashamed of what he will do. It's they who are doing the shameful things. It's he who's opposing the shameful things. Then Dionysus says, well, you have to wear women's clothing. Otherwise, they'll kill you. Then Pentheus seems to accept Dionysus' explanation, despite his armor, and he panics. As we're told, terror flusters an army under arms and its station before it touches a spear. That was the original description that Tiresias gave. So somehow Dionysus gets to him. Dionysus is the god of panic, of causeless fear. But this is like saying that the disguised Dionysus, that is, he's not manifestly a god, is the cause of Pentheus's panic. Or put it this way, only the god who is recognized as the god of the power of illusion can show himself directly by showing himself as illusion. So Pentheus is afraid, but he experiences his fear here as sensible prudence. And he doesn't experience the true object of his fear. So Dionysus has come close to convincing him, first, that what he has is an erotic longing. What he really has an erotic longing to do is really only done out of duty. This is the city. And now that avoiding his fear can be accomplished by something that's not shameful, but a sensible precaution. Put on women's dress and go indirectly. Now, the final straw is going to be that what Pentheus first will do, only if he can take a back way through the city because it's so shameful, in the end, he wants to do in full view of everybody in order to show how courageous he is. So at line 61, 62, we get this. He says, take me through the middle of Thebes. I am the only man of them that would make this venture. So Dionysus convinces him that he can show his courage by being shameless. That's his complete conversion from political life. We're not privy to what exactly it is that Dionysus does to complete the conversion. We only get an advanced description of it. But Dionysus seems to have made a systematic appeal to whatever natural passions exist in Pentheus that support political life. He makes that appeal so as in some way to turn these passions against the political. So Pentheus' sense of the noble, certain things are beneath him. That's how he experiences it. I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't don women's clothing. I wouldn't do any number of things. That's beneath me. That's ignoble. Dionysus uses this sense that certain things are beneath Pentheus to lead him to think that the notion that certain things are beneath him is really beneath him. That's how he pulls it off. It's interesting, by the way, that it turns out that there's a connection in Plato's Republic in the end of the 8th, beginning of the 9th book. You get a really wonderfully similar argument where it's interesting because it's an argument that is all the time making really scarcely veiled references to Sophocles' Oedipus the King. It's an account of the origin of tyranny, and it turns out that, in a way, the characteristic of the tyrant is that, and we talked about this in another context once before, that the tyrant sleeps with whomever he wishes, kills whomever he wishes, does whatever he wishes, but it turns out that this doesn't have anything finally to do with wanting to sleep with people. It's not sexual. It doesn't have anything to do with wanting to eat, eating whatever you want, or drinking whatever you want, or killing whomever you want. It really is a manifestation of your need to show that you can do whatever you want. So it's not a desire, a positive desire for anything. It's a sort of negative affirmation of the fact that you can do whatever you wish. Now, in the Republic, this comes under the name spiritedness or thumos, and Plato identifies, Socrates in the argument identifies it with the fundamental political passion, which, if you push it all the way, leads to something like tyranny. So it turns out that something very similar is going on here. Pentheus is the political man, the civilized man, the one who stands for the absoluteness of civilization. Dionysus, in a way, uses that against him, and it turns out that the man who would be ashamed to do certain things because they're beneath him is told what? Wouldn't you be ashamed to think that you couldn't do anything because it was beneath you? Isn't the very notion of shame beneath you? So ultimately, this need to honor yourself, you could say, is used by Dionysus here. It's the political passion, but when pushed to its extreme, it undermines the political altogether. So the final irony of all of this is what? Dionysus ends by calling Pentheus Denos. And the chorus defend what Dionysus is doing in terms of justice. So it's now Pentheus who is understood to be unjust and lawless. Okay, what have we got? We're one generation removed from the founding of Thebes. And it turns out it has to be refounded. The old order, the order that was based on the notion of autochthony, established a too complete separation of Thebes from the rest of the earth. You begin with the Spartoi, you begin with Cadmus sowing seeds in the ground, and you end by collapsing the distinction between the conventional and the natural. But to collapse the distinction between what's conventional and natural means that you do away with the notion of the natural. When you do away with the notion of the natural, there's nothing to stand in the way of the conventional. So Dionysus returns to vindicate his mother and to make it clear that there's something beyond the conventional that prevents the complete civilizing or civifying of our lives. Any civilization that doesn't want to destroy itself has to provide a convention whereby the natural is acknowledged. So we come back again to the Eumenides and to the grave of Oedipus. Dionysus must be worshipped. His rituals have to be followed. At the same time, the conventional character of these rituals has to be clear, or else they won't serve their purpose. So Dionysus is not only the god of the power of nature, at the same time, he's also the god of the power of illusion. We recognize that power most, the power of illusion, when we're most thoroughly deceived by it. So Dionysus is the god of seeing double, of the theater. And the Bacchae is Euripides' account of the natural power of his own art. Now, one final thing before I stop and see if you have questions. We've sort of tied it up and nice in a ribbon. But at the same time, as you would expect, I mean, we spent 2 days on this play, and we already know that you can't do any of these plays in that amount of time. So we've glossed over some things. So, for example, let's go back to the punishment issue by thinking about the beginning of the play. Why did Semele want to see Zeus? Well, she wanted to know who the father of her children was. She wanted to see the real Zeus, the real father of her child. Now, how does the play end? Dionysus punishes Agave by making her unable to see who her child is. Agave, Ino, Atanawe did no more than Semele did. So what does this mean, this doubt about the identity of your children? This is the position that all males are in all the time. Only the female, the woman, the mother, can know who her child is. The man is always, for the man, there's always a doubt. It's always indirect knowledge. But the interesting thing is that when there are gods, invisible gods, what's always naturally true for men now becomes a problem as well for women. You don't know the child because the identity of the father is fundamentally unknown to you. The very existence of God somehow leads to a rift between mother and child that is meant to complete the politicizing of human life. Thebes is the example of the complete politicizing of human life. This is what it's being punished for. The women are somehow at fault for not holding out. So the Bacchae has something to do with the dispersal of the polis, the city that was founded in a fundamental rebellion against the natural. Cadmus and Harmonia are going to become snakes. They're going to become what it is that Cadmus initially vanquished. Autonomy kills her son and is exiled. They seem to be the real targets. Pentheus is only the instrument. So they're punished. Pentheus, the polis, is from the outset simply to be destroyed. He never realizes he's being punished. So it turns out that Cadmus is punished for the completeness of the task he set out to do. And his daughters are punished because of the failure to support their sister Semele. You could say they too easily give in to a world in which the invisible gods are in principle capable of secretly impregnating any woman, so much so that they secretly or in disguise impregnating any woman, so much so that the mother, now like the father, is really unaware of her own child, the true nature of her own child. So it, in a way, is what Dionysus stands opposed to is the utter conventionalizing of childbirth, given the power of the gods. So it looks as though Dionysus, in his role as a god of the natural on the one hand, and the god of illusion on the other hand, really stands for the political necessity of maintaining the imperfection of the political. Pentheus is too good for his own good. And this whole account is too good for its own good. I mean, it's too neat. The book is more complicated, and if we had world enough and time, we could do all of them, but we can't, so on to the Iphigenia. what Dionysus makes clear is that every illusion is grounded on something natural. It's not what it thinks it is, but it is something. And so you could say the ability to see double means that on the one hand, you recognize the illusion as an illusion, and on the other hand, you feel the power of the illusion. You see why he's the god of the theater. The theater is the place where you know it's not true, and yet it's true. Or the god of with all of this punning, the reason Homer comes in, the reason Homeros comes in, is that, in fact, poetry is precisely what makes it possible for you to know. I mean, Hesiod, the epic poet shortly after Homer, is famous for having talked about, having the muses talk about how they lie like the truth. So poetry lies like the truth. It turns out that that the lie part is apparent in the city, but it's also not simply a lie because it had to come from something. It's another version of an old problem, which is really sort of the basis of Platonic philosophy, that there's no such thing as an utterly false opinion, because it had to come from somewhere. So Platonic dialogues typically take this form. Socrates asks the question, what is X? What is justice? What is beauty? What is whatever? And you get the conventional answer, and the conventional answer turns out not to make any sense. But if it were simply the case that all the conventional answers were false, and that's all there were to it, that would be sort of tragic, because there wouldn't be any place to go after that. You'd know that the ordinary ways, and you'd be Pentheus, you'd know that the ordinary ways in which you take things to stand in the world in terms of their beauty, their justice, their goodness, were false, and you wouldn't have any place to go. So it turns out that for human beings to live well, something like, not in the sense of something in a department, in a university or a college, but something like philosophy has to be possible. It has to be possible to see through the illusory character of the world in such a way that you gain some purchase on the way things really are. You have to be able to move from seeming to being in some way. And it turns out that that is possible because illusion is never simply illusion. It is grounded in something. It has to come from somewhere. So characteristically, Platonic dialogue takes somebody's false opinion and pushes and pushes and pushes until you see, oh, I see where that came from. I see why you think that. And the consequence of that is that you discover some ground, genuine ground, in the illusion. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that only the God who is the God of illusion can be looked at directly without burning up. But doesn't simply mean that, the only thing you can look at is fake stuff. It means that the realization that something is fake is a strange, inverted way of understanding what's true. Yeah, so you could say, the first step is thinking about anything seriously, is recognizing that you don't know what you're talking about. And it's the hardest thing in the world to do. It's one of the reasons why one of the greatest dangers to serious thinking is morality. Not because you should be immoral or think that morality isn't serious, but because morality tends to make you so confident in your opinions about the most important things, like Pentheus, that you don't actually even know what it would mean to wonder about what it would mean for them not to be true. So it really is the case that you need to be very, very careful about moral indignation. It almost always goes with failure of thought. Doesn't mean you don't take take moral stands, but when you find yourself getting on your high horse, you're probably a little higher than you should be, than you really have a right to be. So that's what Pentheus is, right? He's so convinced of the importance of the city that it never occurs to him that he could be wrong about any of this. That's interesting. I think that you put the problem, if I've understood what you mean, you put the problem this way, that you could write this play in a way without making him a god at all, and have him come back as an angry hero, angry at the fact that his divine ancestry is not being acknowledged, and that that's a slur on his mother's good name because it just makes her look like she's somebody who got pregnant out of wedlock and she's using this as an excuse to get out of it. That's what actually Cadmus suggests. He says, listen, this is as good a story as any. At least this takes the shame away from us. So you could rewrite it in that way, and you'd have a different play. It'd be interesting to think about what the play would look like. But I think your point is, this is different. This is a different case because this is a being who is claiming not just to be the offspring of God, not Achilles. He's not claiming to be an Achilles. He's claiming to be a god. Even Achilles didn't claim that. So then the question is, why is the myth constructed this way, and why did Euripides adopt it in this way? And it looks as though it has something to do with the peculiar kind of God that Dionysus is, or claims to be, so that I think the way to begin thinking about it would be this, that if he's the god of illusion, the god of seeing double, the god who appears on the one hand as his own priest, and on the other hand, in the background, there's something else at work that transcends these particular manifestations. There is, in a way, the suggestion that his doubleness is really the characteristic of authentic gods. I mean, of all gods that appear to human beings, whether they understand it that way or not. Or you could put it in this way: how interesting it is that you have this whole pantheon of gods, and they're all anthropomorphic. So this is, in a way, an explanation of what's true of all of them, but what sort of passes unnoticed, that they're all God-men. And that combination is both necessary and problematic. Now, this is why this play, by the way, has incredible importance. It's strange as it seems, given who he is and what he's the god of, this play has incredible importance for the Christian tradition, where it turns out that you have a different version of the problem. Christ is that version. He's simultaneously God and man, and the suggestion seems to be that that's not an accident, but a necessity. I realize that most powerfully, I taught this course many years ago and taught this play, it must be 15 years ago or more even, and Bill Schulenberger sat in on the course for the entire, it was a year course at the time, actually. And it was in conversation with him when I saw how profound this connection was, because, of course, from the point of view of a practicing Christian, he saw this immediately. So it's structurally, the similarity is extraordinary. The difficulty is figuring out what to do with the difference between the God who dies on the cross on the one hand, and the God who is the God of theater and drunkenness, and so on and so forth on the other hand. There's obviously something very different going on in terms of what the understanding of the significance of this double vision is. But about the necessity of the double vision, it looks as though they're really in complete agreement.